Hi, everybody. This is Bob Kelka with IBM, and our topic today is a white-hot topic across cybersecurity today because it addresses a fantasy that we see most organizations have around how they're managing identities and their access to our hybrid systems. That topic is the identity fabric. When we look at the identity fabric, it is based on the ability to address identity and access management across all of our hybrid systems. Now, what do I mean by that? In every organization, there is a focus on making sure that we can control access to both our customers or consumers, as well as managing access for our workforce, such as our employees, our partners, and other folks like that. So you'll generally hear people talk about workforce IAM, identity and access management, as well as CIAM, CIAM, consumer IAM. And when I go into a client, and I've been doing this a long time, I've been working with clients in cybersecurity for 30 years now, just hit 9 million air miles with American Airlines. So I'm with folks every day talking about this. Almost inevitably, when I ask, what is your strategy for managing access for your customers and your workforce, I'll get the name of a tool. They'll say, oh, well, we're using IBM Verify or Okta or Ping or SailPoint or something like that. In other words, what they're telling me is that their strategy for doing this is picking a single tool, an identity and access management tool, and then tying it to some store of users, a directory, a user directory it's called. And they'll say, I've standardized on this tool in this directory. And I say, well, that's not a strategy, that's a tool. And they say, well, no, that's my strategy because I've chosen this as my strategic tool. And everybody will come use it. And that's where the problem occurs. Because what you find is in most organizations, you will find that there is at least one more identity and access management system and directory handling the workforce versus the customers and consumers. And then you get to the real problem here, which is every organization has some set of legacy applications. And guess what? They have their own identity and access management subsystem. Sometimes it's a side file of user information of who can get access to that application. Sometimes there's a 25-year-old legacy IAM system that the organization has been trying to get rid of for 20 years that they can't get rid of because the people who wrote it aren't around anymore and they're not going to go open up those things. So when we look at it, where are we actually managing identities today? We're managing them all over. And guess what? That's before we get to the cloud, where you have one or more clouds where, guess what? You're also managing identity and access management as well. So this is why the answer of a tool for your strategy for identity and access management is a fantasy, because the legacy apps aren't going to use that. And by the way, the legacy apps probably don't even support multi-factor authentication, so you can't even use the latest developments. And then you've got to manage your hybrid cloud stuff too. Now, I had a client a couple of weeks ago tell me, yes, you nailed it. This is my rat's nest of identity management technology. Now, look, the fact that it's so complex is unattractive, but what's the real business problem? The business problem is that there are a number of new developments and new innovations in cybersecurity that everybody wants to take advantage of, but you can't when you are managing identities in so many different places, often with inconsistent management. So what do I mean by that? Let me give you an example of some of the innovations that are popping up these days. The first one, everyone wants to do frictionless authentication. What is frictionless authentication? Frictionless authentication is when we look at how do we log into something. Do I have to enter a password? Do I have to enter a password plus a 6-digit code that you send to my phone? Frictionless authentication is I don't do anything except put my finger on the fingerprint reader on my MacBook or look at my phone and use Face ID. Using that kind of access to get into systems. Everybody wants that because it's easier to use. And guess what? The underlying technology, it's passwordless technology using things like FIDO2 passkeys. It's more secure. So we all in IT want people to use that because it's more secure. And the users go, it's so easy to use your systems. Why is that important? Well, if you have your customers coming into your portal and it's hard to get access to, and then they look at a competitor and they have something easier, they go, well, it's just easier to do business with them. So frictionless authentication is a huge one. A second issue that's coming up all the time is how do you do threat management for identities? Today, what most people do is they'll turn on a user behavior analytics UBA module in their security operations center in their SIM tool, and then they'll over time deduce identity problems. Well, identity problems are the number one threat today. In our 2024 X-Force Threat Intelligence Index, 30%, number one, 30% of all attacks over the last 12 months is leveraging a compromised valid account. It's because we're not detecting that's happening. So we need to be able to find that. So what's happening is folks want to put in threat management closer to the identities, and that's led to a hot new space called ITDR, Identity Threat Detection and Response. They want to apply it, but how do you apply that consistently across this hybrid mess? You can't. It's rhetorical, just like the frictionless. How do you do frictionless authentication consistently across this hybrid mess? You can't. All right, let's take a third example. Here's a question nobody seems to be able to answer. Auditors will ask you, give me a single view of everyone who has access to any of your systems. Nobody can do it because they're managing users all over the place. And then a fourth one. This one is particularly white hot right now. Cyber insurance providers have figured out that most organizations have certain cybersecurity holes, deficiencies. And one of the hottest ones for that right now is how do you manage access for your privileged accounts? Everybody knows they should do what's called privileged access management, or PAM, but most organizations have done it somewhat, but not fully. And the cyber insurance providers have figured this out. And they're saying, hey, unless you can prove to me that you've rolled out proper PAM controls across your organization, I'm not going to renew your policy. And what CISO in the universe wants to be the person responsible for their company losing their cyber insurance policy because of sloppy deployment of something that's been around for 20 years, right? This is the real problem that the identity fabric solves. How do I take these innovations and problems and apply them against this hybrid mess? So what we found is there are 7 elements to an effective identity fabric. You don't have to do all of them. You pick the 1 or 2 that will have the most impact for you, and over time you become a more joined fabric in how you manage identity and access management. So let's look at what those 7 elements are. First is orchestration. The ability to do automated workflows, such as I have a user accessing a legacy app with a password. I put in an orchestrated workflow that next time they authenticate, I, unbeknownst to them, create an account for them in a modern identity and access management system, apply the policy for MFA and passwordless, and all future access goes through that. So you enable frictionless, automated. Customer has no idea other than next time they authenticate, they look at their phone and they're in. And they go, wow, I really like working with this company. Second is risk-based authentication. What most people do today is when they use multi-factor authentication, they'll use an adaptive access solution. And that's why you get like, hey, I just logged in, but they sent me a 6-digit code because I'm in a different location than I usually am. That helps, but remember what I said, the number one attack type? The number one attack type over the last 12 months has been leveraging a compromised valid account. If someone hacks into a valid account, how can you tell that someone's compromised it? Well, just using regular adaptive access, you have no chance of finding it. But risk-based authentication essentially is adaptive access plus, because it gives you an AI-fueled behavioral engine that looks at things like, how fast do you type? What's your error rate? What patterns do you usually interact with on your mobile phone? And so when someone logs into a compromised account, you can tell immediately it's not them. And so risk-based authentication is way hot because it allows us to apply behavioral analysis based on AI to the access. Third is legacy app integration, right? The ability to do what I just mentioned with that workflow, leverages the fact that you need low-code, no-code access to legacy apps. Fourth is a brand new space that the analysts are calling identity protection. And that is addressing this threat management problem. How do I find threats closer to the places I'm managing identities? There's two hot new acronyms that address this. As first is identity threat detection and response, which is finding the threats that are happening in the identity, like cred stuffing, brute force attacks, plus identity security posture management, which is looking for posture problems that could lead to threats being more successful, such as MFA bypass and shadow directories and assets and stuff like that. Fifth is directories and directory synchronization. That addresses this point around a single point of view. Technology has been around 20 years, but people haven't been using it effectively. So you can, in fact, provide a virtual viewer who has access to what? 6 is you need to have identity governance. So you have consistent onboarding, offboarding, and management of users. And then finally is privileged access management to address that cyber insurance policy, especially right now. I mean, it's just a good thing to do by itself, but it's become really super hot right now because of the challenge from cyber insurance policies providers. So let me close with an example of a client that is doing some of this stuff with us, because I think it really makes the case for why this is such a compelling thing to do. We've been working with a financial services company where when they started for their customer portal, and it's an insurance company, so the customers are logging in, right, to do important stuff. They started out with 100% of all access required friction. The user had to enter a password, sometimes enter a code, stuff like that. They put in an adaptive access solution that was able to, depending on the day, get them down to between 15 and 20% of the time there would be friction. The user would have to do something. By putting in our risk-based authentication engine with an AI-based behavioral health, they've just shared with us they are now less than 1% of authentications require any friction. The users are happier, the environment is more secure, and that's an example how the identity fabric can do this stuff for you. So thank you so much for your time. To learn more, please reach out to your IBM sales team or your IBM business partner.